Will come to order. The last time U.S.-Russia relations were this bad, Kennedy was president and Khrushchev had nuclear missiles pointed at us from Cuba. Today, our embassy in Moscow only has a skeleton staff that faces restrictions from a Russian government working to undermine U.S. interests all over the world. In the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, democratic nations came together to isolate his regime with coordinated condemnation and a punishing set of sanctions. They have reduced revenues from trade in petroleum products, pushed more than 1,000 companies to pull out of Russia, and isolated the country's financial industry. And yet, the Russian economy only shrank by 2% in 2022, and Russia has dramatically increased trade with other autocratic nations, including China and Iran, not to mention India. So we need to continue our coordinated global efforts to target Putin's war machine, because beyond Ukraine and with support of the Wagner Group, Putin continues to be a destructive autocratic force on the world stage. Inside Russia, Kremlin cronies kidnap Americans, from basketball stars to Wall Street Journal reporters, to use as bargaining chips in their geopolitical gains. They've imprisoned Russian dissidents that threaten Putin's power, like Vladimir Kara-Murza or Alexei Navalny. And they've shut down independent media to control the behavior and minds of Russian citizens. But beyond Russia's borders, far away from the headlines of Western nations, there is a very different picture. Sergei Lavrov is globetrotting around the world to shore up support. A so-called limitless partnership with China, which apparently includes working to shape international institutions in their own image, undermining the values of sovereignty, rule of law, and respect for human rights. The Russian embassy here in D.C. is throwing cocktail parties attended by diplomats from all over the global South, who then abstain or even vote against resolutions to support Ukraine. And at the United Nations, Russia uses its seat on the Security Council to make a mockery of any attempt to hold Putin and his regime accountable for the atrocities their forces are committing. So while we can laud the fact that more than 140 UN members condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, versus 35 who abstained, as the Financial Times recently pointed out, those 35 countries represent more than half of the world's population. Underlying these Russian efforts is a sophisticated mis- and disinformation campaign that, quite frankly, I don't believe we are effectively dealing with. Through Wagner mercenaries exploiting instability across the Sahel and Africa, through Russian cyber attacks that destroy infrastructure, to engineering a food crisis that now stretches halfway around the world, the Russian disinformation apparatus continues to find fertile ground for blatant lies that whitewash its own operations and undermine trust in the countries actually working to provide humanitarian assistance, promote peace and security. To say nothing of its targeted campaign against the United States and our electoral systems, as well as those of our democratic allies who embrace the same fundamental human rights and freedoms that underpin our own system. So let me thank our witnesses for appearing today. I hope you'll speak to these challenges and how the United States and our partners can overcome them. How can we better leverage sanctions and punitive tools to further cripple Russia's leadership? How can we better leverage international institutions to confront Russian influence? What tools can we utilize to hold Russian actors accountable for their crimes against humanity in Ukraine and human rights abuses at home? I also hope our witnesses will speak to how we can combat Putin's weaponization of energy from Georgia to Syria to Moldova. I'm pleased that Senator Risch is working with me on a bill to support energy security in Eastern Europe and beyond, which will be critical to cutting off Putin's assets. I'm also working on efforts to support Russian dissidents who have fled and welcome your thoughts on how we can best support those Russians who want to see a brighter future for their country. This question of the future of U.S.-Russia relations is obviously huge. I haven't even touched on non-proliferation or Arctic security or climate change. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Risch